this has been
Well,
amazing.
thank you very much for coming on Sunday morning. I think this is a good way to sort of start Sunday off and then start the week off with contemplating how we can really sort of work at the local level in our communities, investing ourselves in making our communities better places to live, and also to help to preserve and protect the ecosystems in our communities so that we can all thrive, not only the ecosystems, but that we, people in our communities, can thrive. The WILF, a number of years ago, was mainly working on water issues, and we sort of tackled the bottled water issue in a big way. We even had a bottled water brochure that you could cut out in the shape of...
It's back there.
Oh, it's back there.
On there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
They're not cut out. But
These are not cut out, but take one and cut it out. It's really pretty, you know, interesting as a handout when it's cut out and it says no. And that was quite an effective campaign. And WILF is quite known for their study guides. We have a study guide on corporations versus democracy, and we have a study guide on water. And that led 3 years ago at the National Congress 3 years ago to a discussion that really the issues weren't just, the issue was not just water, but the issue really was Earth and Earth democracy. So we broadened our work in water into a new campaign called Earth Democracy that has 4 subcommittees. Guardianship for future generations and the rights of nature, food democracy, local economy, climate, global warming and renewable energy, and the human right to water and the human right to health. So those are our 4 sort of subcommittee campaigns that we're beginning to try to flesh out. But we thought that in order to bring some unity to these 4 sort of subcommittees and to sort of provide a frame to Earth democracy, that we would use the work that Carolyn Raffensperger of the Science and Environmental Health Network has pioneered, really. And that is, first of all, the precautionary principle, and second of all, her work on guardianship for future generations and the rights and responsibilities of the present generation. And Carolyn has first brought the precautionary principle from Germany, where it was developed, to the US in let me see if I can just refresh my memory here.
it was early on, right?
It was in the late 1980s.
Yeah.
At a conference in at Wingspread in Racine, Wisconsin, where at that conference they came out with a statement called the Wingspread Statement, which laid out the principles of the precautionary principle, which really is based on the concept of doing no harm. First,
let me
do no
interrupt for a
harm.
minute. You don't have to really take notes because we have all this stuff written for you there. We'll just be highlighting later. So.
Which is
Puts it better in the brain.
No, it's fine. I agree. But I'm just telling you, you don't have to write all this stuff down.
so. The fundamental of the precautionary principle is do no harm. And it means that you actually need to have the science. Not that the policy is good enough, but that there has to be proof that there's going to be no harm done. So that in fact, you don't implement whatever that product or policy is if you can't demonstrate that it will not do harm. Now, you can often get into pretty serious discussions with scientists who are going to try to demonstrate to you that whatever they're talking about is not going to do harm. But it really is putting the onus on the scientific community and the and government to really make the case that there's going to be no harm done. No harm done to public health and no harm done to ecosystems. So taking that principle, the Wingspread Statement, she began to work with local governments to have them adopt this as local public policy. And it really took hold in the Bay Area. The Bay Area is in the San Francisco Bay Area is a community of concerned people, lots of groups that have been working on environmental issues and public health issues, and also local government officials who themselves are activists and also concerned to really do their duty toward the local communities. So what happened was that the Department of the Environment in San Francisco adopted the precautionary principle as a guideline for their policy and practices. And they began to implement this, they've been implementing it over now a period of years, but what's really interesting about the precautionary principle at the local level like this is that it changes the way that government does business, the kinds of products that they purchase and use, the kinds of processes they use. So for example, rather than using certain kinds of pesticides, they will start using integrated pest management. Rather than using toxic paints and toxic products for all sorts of government, public works, school, other kinds of needs for repair and painting and other sort of public service activities, that they'll start using less toxic or non-toxic products, and also try to carry out those public service functions in a way that produces the least disruption to the environment and the least harm to the environment. And what's interesting about the change in purchasing policy of products is, of course, it has an impact down the line. It impacts then the local economy, because let's say you can buy local. It influences local business to produce those products. It impacts corporations who are producing the toxic products. I mean, you're beginning to shift purchasing policy and that economic impact. And the other thing that happens is that it flies in the face of the free trade agreements, because the free trade agreements do make illegal buy local or buy environmental friendly preferential purchasing. There has not yet been, I believe, a challenge from a multinational to a local government, and you don't sue local governments, you sue the national government on this kind, pardon me?
I'm sorry, I have to go to work, just some babysitting
Sure.
between two of us, but we do have the younger generation here.
Yes.
My daughter is here, my grandson is
Good.
here.
Oh, wonderful.
Is it okay if I take this? Will it be?
Yes,
because
you
I'm
take
really
that,
interested
we'll
in
get
it.
the address of
It's
people
fine.
who
We'll
don't
send the
have.
people who
Alright.
don't have them, we'll send them back to you.
Or
No.
you could send it to me if you want, if you'd rather do that, and
Well,
I can leave a card.
take that and we'll get an address and we'll send it.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. Sorry.
Yeah. So there has yet to be, I think, a multinational challenge to the federal government that Berkeley's buy local or buy environmental friendly products is harming their bottom line. But you could see that if this really took off in a big way, and if we talk about we want to change the system, that the issue is not the issues, but the issue is the system. If we really want to change the system and change the economy, we have to start locally like this with all kinds of campaigns. And enacting the precautionary principle and shifting purchasing policy and shifting use policy of harmful products is really a way to start to change your local economy, working from the grassroots up. So you could go from your local municipality to your county government, and ultimately you could go to the state government. And so for states like in California, where we're beginning to be faced with a horrific campaign to frack California, it's going to be this fall. The surviving bill in the California state legislature, out of I think about 12 or more bills that were meant to regulate fracking in California, or there were two, I think there was one moratorium bill or two moratorium bills and one ban bill. They of course died immediately in committee. But there's one bill that may get may get to Governor Brown's desk, but I doubt it. And it's a regulatory bill for disclosure of the chemical compound, but it's somewhat limited. But in any event, you could use the precautionary principle in instances of resources extraction and fracking, and lift that up, that the the government and industry really need to prove that there's no harm in using these chemicals. Or, in fact, you could track the externalities back to, for example, in one of our panels, you learned about sand mining for fracking that goes into the fracking fluid to keep the small fractures open. They force not only the chemicals down, but they force sand with those chemicals so the small fractures will stay open. So you could trace that all the way back to the impact in other areas of the country on ecosystems. And you could enact the precautionary principle all the way through. But it's very important, I think, to lift this up because we really need to advocate for the right to public health as a human right. And we need to also advocate that our local governments recognize that right very strongly. And one way to do that is to ask them to pass a precautionary principle ordinance. Berkeley, California has done it, other communities have done this, so that it's something to really become engaged with, to begin to change policy.
Let me interrupt for 1 second. The bill that passed, or the bill that's going to go to Jerry Brown to sign, is going to take effect in 2016. And what it will say, what it says, is they have to disclose the chemicals that they already used, because they're going to be fracking for the next 3 years. The chemicals will have already been used, and Paisley's bill will just let us know what they were. So when Nancy and I are talking about this, it's like if we had a precautionary principle beforehand, that couldn't go into effect. It's a way to protect ourselves before the harm is done. In Santa Cruz, they sprayed us, the farm workers in the field, all of our whole county with a pesticide against a light brown apple moth, which never was a problem anyway, never caused any apple damage. But they sprayed us with toxic pesticide, and we had a moratorium, a resolution by the county and a resolution by all the 4 cities in the county not to use it. But it was a state level decision. They went ahead and let this chemical company do it. What's the use of doing something afterwards? So we really got, woke up and said, okay, we absolutely need a blanket policy. We can't fight every chemical that they're gonna send down the line. There's gonna be many more pests, right? You just can't fight them one by one. This is a prior policy, and we just need to have it. Okay.
So that's one really important tool that I think we need to lift up and advocate for. And you can see that it has ramifications that are very important. And I think that if we're going to shift climate work from just bringing down CO2 and just focusing on the XL pipeline, that's really insufficient. We have to really change we have to change our demands and really make the climate movement into a broad-based human rights, civil rights, labor rights, earth rights movement, or we're really not going to achieve the kind of change that we really need to protect people and the planet. So by advocating for the precautionary principle in regard to the right to health and the right to healthy ecosystems, that is, the earth has rights, and the precautionary principle can help implement those rights, then we're really not going to be using our local advocacy and our claim to be a sovereign people effectively. So the other work that Carolyn has done on guardianship of future generations is also fundamental to changing the way local government operates, and it's introducing the potential for a new mechanism at the level of local government. She advocates for an office of guardianship that would be an appointed or elected office, and this individual would have the authority to, first of all, depending on how the authority is vested, but it could include doing an inventory of local ecosystems and the local natural commons to assess the state of rivers, the forests, land, air quality, and other aspects of ecosystems in the town, in the community, or let's say at the county level, so that there's an inventory that can be used going forward to see, for example, what aspect of the commons, the natural commons, needs restoration, needs protection, or needs to be guarded in some way that's determined by the guardian or a committee of guardians that's part of a council. I mean, she envisions also that this is sort of a council or a department. And the problem is that it probably takes funding, and that's an issue at local government levels these days. It could be a voluntary office. It could be an office, a group of citizens that come together and do this in an advisory capacity. So it could be worked out at the local level in some way, but by taking this concept forward to the city council or county council and seeing how it might be implemented is a place to start. And the notion of guardianship is that actually we, as the present generation, must really take this responsibility seriously. It's not enough to pass it off to government officials to regulate properly, or knowing that they're often bought off by small money, big money, local business concerns, and they really, for all the reasons we know, are not really looking after the public interest and looking after nature. And so in an advisory capacity, this can be prescribed in detail. And you can engage, for example, in Santa Cruz is beginning to look at how this might take place. You could engage your local university. You can engage other nonprofits. You can look at how studies, who might help you with studies that are needed to build an inventory of the commons. And it can be a collaborative process of building the kinds of networks needed to ensure that the local ecosystems are really healthy and thriving. And this also relates to implementing the rights of nature. So you can talk about not only the precautionary principle in terms of guardianship, but you can talk about human rights and the rights of nature. And you could take forward, for example, the need to enact at the local level an ordinance guaranteeing the rights of nature or the rights of Mother Earth at the local level. You can build guardianship and the precautionary principle into an ordinance that recognizes that the community needs to be based on principles of sustainability. And how do you achieve those principles of sustainability would be one, through enacting the precautionary principle, and second, appointing a guardian or creating an office of guardianship or a council of guardians to assess every year how the project of guardianship is moving forward and how the rights of nature are being protected. So these two sort of foundational principles or framing principles are really, I think, fundamental toward moving forward in asserting human rights, community rights, the rights of Earth, the rights of Mother Nature, and to building coalitions at the local level who want to do this work and carrying it forward. And ultimately, it really is reclaiming our authority as democratic actors in our local government. And that will help build the grassroots movement, the grassroots democracy movement, the grassroots environmental movement, shifting it in a different direction, away from just regulatory environmentalism, but toward really a rights-based movement. So I hope that's, I'll be happy to answer a question or two.
Do you want questions as we go, or?
You know, I think that after we go through this material, maybe that would be better,
Okay.
because what we try to do is give you the information that you really will need to understand not only these ideas, but how to implement them.
Sure.
It's no use just to talk about the ideas, so what do we do about that? People in the back don't have these packets.
I'm going to go down to see if I've got 3 more. I'll be right
As
back.
many more as you have, because we have 1, 2, 3.
Yes, well, I know.
Great, thanks.
I
So,
think I just have 3 now.
I'm sorry, we had more people than we expected the first one, so I can send you, anyone who doesn't get those materials, just give me your email and I'll send them to you. And the first page, so open the packets, and the first page of the packet on the left is this flower. And it expresses for us what this whole conference has been about. That it's all interconnected, and it's important to make that point to people that we'll go back to in our communities. There's no use for us just to be working on fracking, although we have to. You know, there's no use to be working on one particular bottled water and one particular thing. It's just too intertwined now. So the overriding idea is communities and nature. That's what we're protecting. We're protecting ourselves and the planet. There's nothing less than that. And we're up to it. We can do this. And the way that we can do this, I mean, all these different workshops have shown us different ways that we can go about this. So that's been really wonderful. Nancy already talked about the precautionary principle, and we'll talk about a little bit more, and guardianship for future generations. I'm not going to talk much, but you all know about this, which is community rights versus corporate rights. So this is definitely coming up against the big corporations, and that's fine, we need to. The rights of nature are in there, the commons is in there, and indigenous wisdom. Now in Santa Cruz, the indigenous group of people that have been living there for at least 10,000 years are called the Ohlonies. And the Ohlonies share with many other tribes the idea of protecting the earth. And more than protecting the earth, as one of our speakers said before, being one with the earth. You know, we all have that feeling on some level. I don't know if our kids have that feeling on some level. And I also don't think that, my kids, I have 3 daughters in their 30s, they have kids. They don't have the same kind of hope that we do because they see that we're destroying their world. So I think it's our responsibility now, starting now, right now, to not only give them that hope, but say to them, here, we can do something for this. And one benefit of this program or this idea of guardianship is to bring the generations together and say, you know, we're not giving up. You know, I'm sorry we gave you this mess, but we can do something together to get out of it. And we know what's standing in our way. It's not that we intended this, but the corporations have subverted the entire democracy, and we can take it back on local levels and then build up, the way she was saying. So the idea started at the Women's Congress in Utah a few years ago. Some Wilfers went, joined in on it, Nancy did, Carolyn Raffensperger presented, and the women were talking about that. How are we guarding our generations to come? And this is spun out of that. Also, I put some things back there that we've developed from there. I have the fracking brochures that we're using in Santa Cruz, and we've had them translated to Spanish too. So if those will help you, you can take samples of them. In there's a place to put your own local organization. This is, at least it will give you a sample of what's going on. And we have the bottled water. Okay, so on the left-hand page, on the left-hand section of your binder, you see that flower in case you want to use it for future publicity. And also, there's some of you, I don't know if any of you have this, but I have an additional resource page. So if you were to use this, if you were to give this kind of workshop, you would want to put in a resource page for the people that you're living with. And there's a page called the Jigsaw Procedure and Double Circle Instructions on the back. And this is over on the left-hand side. Those are 2 activities that we do when we present this day-and-a-half-long workshop. So we have an hour and a half, and what we've done is try to coalesce all the materials so that you can see what we use. And then if you want to go ahead and expand this into a larger workshop or use it in some way, we can help you do that. Either train the trainers or just talk you through it. The materials are all available. Many of them, not the jigsaw procedures, but many of the ones on the right, are available at Carolyn's Science and Environmental Health Network, which is just HESCHN.org, Science and Environmental Health Network. And we've taken this from there. You're not laughing at my handwriting, right?
No, my wife's left-handed too.
My students used to say, I'm a 7th grade teacher, I retired a few years ago. My students used to say, please type this stuff for us. I'm like, don't make us read this stuff. And the last thing that I put in on the back of the section on the left-hand side is a crazy idea and wonderful that someone had to give this whole guardianship concept to Michelle Obama and say, make this your legacy. You know, wake up, lady, you're a lawyer, what are you doing? You know, you're doing nothing right now, you're just playing around with obesity, and I'm not saying it's not important, but you're not doing anything on a huge level, and you could be. This is something that you could push.
Nobody yet has given it to her.
I don't know whether Carolyn has given it to you yet. I don't think so, but I think we should. Carolyn's idea is not only to do this on a local level, but to do this on a national level. Set up an office of a guardian, a guardianship level cabinet post that says we are going to protect the future. Now, whether our country is up to doing that or not, I don't know. But maybe Michelle will say, oh, I only got 2 more years in this big house, why not, you know? You never know, you gotta think that. Okay, so now we're gonna look at the papers on the right. And I'm just gonna go through them with you quickly. I gave everybody highlighters, and people in the back, their packets are coming. And I'm going to show you what I think are the more salient things that you need to highlight, and then go home and read them. Because you just can't do a day and a half workshop in an hour and a half, but you can at least see what the story is. So at this Women's Congress, the first thing they started with was a touchy-feely women's thing, right? And it was wonderful. We really like embraced the idea that we're all grieving. Everyone's walking around this planetary depression. What a depression makes you do is get into bed, pull the covers over your head, and read a book, right? And we can't afford the time for that. So it started out with this Declaration of Rights held by future generations, which is called the preamble here. So just highlight that top title. There is nothing in here that you don't agree with, I'm sure. It's just about future generations do have a right. Turn the page over.
What are we doing?
The preamble.
Oh, okay.
So if you turn that page over, the second page has, at the top, toward a Bill of Rights held by future generations. And the third page has the responsibilities of present generations. The responsibilities and the rights listed are things that we already believe. We have a right to a healthy environment. We have a right to peace. Future generations have a right to a clean, restored ecosystem. We have a right for a sustainable economy. What responsibilities do we have? We have a responsibility to heed early warnings. We're bright, we can see what's coming. We have to do something. We don't have to wait until the whole system is brought down. We can try to do something right now. We have a responsibility to uphold United Nations treaties on rights, which our country just says, whoosh, we sign them, but yeah, or we don't bother even signing. So, rights and responsibilities, and that's a nice beginning to working on, what do we think we owe each other? It also helps when you have younger people in a room to say, we recognize this, we owe you some stuff. And you know what? We know that we have responsibilities to do this. So turn the page. On the fourth page, there's guiding principles that inform the covenant between present and future generations. The second paragraph is rights held to the commons, that present and future generations share rights with each other and to a whole and healthy commons. Why do we need to even say that? It's ridiculous. But our society has been so fractured that sometimes people don't know, we're not only running the parks around here, but we have an ocean in Santa Cruz. And whatever it is that in your area that you hold sacred and dear to yourself.
You might have to breathe every once in a while.
You might have to breathe. How about that air? You couldn't find it. No?
I'm so sorry, I don't have them. I left them where I'm staying.
Okay, well, to the people in back, they're listening, and we'll send them to them. Okay, the fourth paragraph down. Governments hold two responsibilities, and Nancy touched on this. Protect the rights and care for the commons. That's what we want our governments to do for us. And if they're not doing that, we have a responsibility to do something about that, about our government. So that's hard to say on a national level, but not so hard on a local level. On a local level, you can say to people in your community, they aren't protecting the ocean. Look at all that junk going into the ocean.
You have a big organization in Chicago, they're selling off the commons right and left.
All of us have that. They're selling off the commons. It's almost unconscionable. It's almost so big that we can't believe it. Look at the schools. I can't believe they're closing all those schools in Chicago without giving people a right to say something about it.
The schools, the parking, the port, they're moving towards the airport.
And I think we're all under attack like that, right? And you look and see, in some places, the water, like there's a small community around Fresno. Fresno is a Central Valley community in California. That's a sizable community. Small communities around it, mostly Mexican-American and Mexican immigrant farm workers. And, they don't even pay those people any attention at all. So they'll go and mess around with their sand or their gravel, totally destroy their water. And the poorest people in our state have to pay for bottled water or water to be trucked in. And no one is looking. So this gives people a way to look at it. So the next section is called the Commons, short and sweet. And It's an interesting article to read its entirety, but on the third page, on the top it says JS3.
This is another paper.
It's in the next big packet. The first part says the comments.
Oh, this one.
It is fast, Carol, you know, you have a chance to go home and read, all of us can read it.
Yeah, well, some people are easily confused, so. we
I
just
hate
have
to say it, ain't you though. Okay, ready? Under principles, 3 paragraphs down, you can just circle that. It's the whole essence of it. The things that belong to all of us must be named, claimed, defended, protected, and improved. And we have a mutual responsibility to take care of them. So this is a nice statement that says, do what we know we have to do. Third from the bottom is the democracy part of it. People most affected by critical decisions must be included in the process of making them. And that's what doesn't happen. It didn't happen to the Chicago school kids, school parents, teachers, whatever. No one has. Right?
I'd just
Go
like
ahead.
to make a point, because you brought it up about Chicago and the closing of the schools. What's happened there with the school closing, and I believe it's the teachers union that's leading this effort, they have petitioned the Human Rights Council at United Nations to investigate the closing of the schools as a human rights issue. So as a violation of the International Convention, Human Rights Conventions, and I think the human rights of the child. So that's a very interesting way for a first world country, actually, to begin to use the United Nations in that regard. Whereas we always think, you know, that somehow it's the rights of the developing countries and third world countries that are going to the UN. But here, it's the school teachers, the teachers union, and parents who are going to the UN to invoke their human rights and civil rights. I haven't seen the document, but so that's a very interesting development, I think.
Did we sign up to the rights of the child? Did you guys sign that?
We've
That's all.
signed it but not ratified.
Yeah.
We're the only country in the world, except Somalia, which hasn't.
The reason I understand is that we do put our kids in jail. And that we'd have to not put our juveniles in jail under that. They'd have to be offered something else. And then occasionally, in some states, juveniles are threatened with capital punishment. And that's outlawed under that rights of the child. So we're not gonna sign.
And parents want the right to whip their kids.
Yeah, corporal punishment. Yeah. Okay, so turn over, the next page is called the Iceville Creek Statement. This gives you a little bit of history. Signed in 2001.
Is this still common?
Keep going, we're on page JS, what is it called? 4. And the bottom paragraph of that section is the definition of the precautionary principle. So you might want to highlight or circle that. When an activity or condition raises credible threats of harm to ecosystems, precautionary measures should be taken, even if the cause and effect relationships are not fully established. So we're not begging. We're not saying, oh, please show us that the carbon in the atmosphere is harmful, or the arsenic in the water. We don't have to. What we have to say is, if you haven't proved that that's safe for us, don't use it. And that's the precautionary principle. It has to be proved safe before we use it.
How does that stand up to court challenges, particularly with personhood?
It's a good question, and I'm not sure. I had an environmental attorney review this stuff, and he just sent me an email of 2 things that he thought were not up to snuff. And I'll discuss with you at the end. You know, these things are all in the works, right? So we can make it better and better. On the next page, on JS5, is just an interesting list of what quality and variety of people signed this Iceville Creek Statement, that we need the precautionary principle. And they're from all over the world, and they're from all universities and civil engineers and Audubon Society and resource analysts, just to have a look at what kind of people signed that. Turn the page. The next is the same kind of thing. It's the wind spread statement that Nancy referred to. This is the originating statement in 98. And again, just look at the bottom and the next page list. These are high-quality scientists and university people and Indigenous Environmental Network and Physicians for Social Responsibility who all think that this precautionary principle will give us some protection. And they wrote this wing spread statement again on the precautionary principle.
It's important to recognize that this principle has been enacted in Europe. It originated in Germany and has been enacted in Europe, and Europe has now created a chemical registry so that they're trying now to go through the chemicals that are used in the environment to register them as on a scale of safeness. And any new chemicals now that come onto the market are going to have to be assessed against the precautionary principle. So Europe is way ahead of the US in really trying to safeguard public health and the environment in a really serious way. And we're now negotiating this trade agreement, you know, with Europe and the US. And Europeans are very worried about how their more advanced approach to public health and the environment is going to be impacted, particularly with the pressure for opening up their markets to GMOs.
Yeah.
And to all of that brings in terms of chemical impacts. So I think the more that we can talk about this in our own communities and in our own person-to-person conversations and sort of lift this up and recognize that the trade agreements are going to impact, particularly the EU-US trade agreement is going to have huge impact. And we have to give support to the Europeans and say, in fact, we really would like these protections. And that we think a trade agreement that should harm and push down regulations to suit profit over people and the environment is wrong. So this gives us a bit of a way to get into the trade argument other than, you know, labor and manufacturing and jobs. But really look at the environment in a serious way.
And the next page, JS 8, starts a section on which municipalities in our country have already enacted this. It's already starting here. Precautionary principle ordinances in US municipal or state legislation. It gives a little background. And about 5 paragraphs down it says, in the 4 decades since the Stockholm Declaration, the right to a healthy environment has been ratified by 177 of the world's 183 UN member nations. In their constitutions, in their environmental legislation, in their court decisions, they recognize the right to a healthy environment. We're not in there. Neither is Canada, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, neither is China,
Right.
and there's a number of other smaller countries. But by far, 177 out of 193 nations have in their constitutions or in their legislation recognized the right to a healthy environment. So we have something strong to stand on. Okay, turn the page and just look at it. On JS 9, in 2003, New York and San Francisco County enacted legislation for the precautionary principle. In 2004, Multnomah County in Oregon did it. The Marin County in California did it, and other counties in California. Turn the page. 2005, Emeryville, State of New Mexico. In 2006, Berkeley Ordinance for Precautionary Principle, and I'll show you one in a minute. Multnomah County in Oregon, Mendocino again, and on next page, on 2010, an important one, in the township of Lyndhurst, New Jersey. So on the top of that page, it's JS 11. Lyndhurst, New Jersey established a precautionary policy, and they had 5 requisites for that, which I think are important. I'm not going to read them all to you, but I'll tell you the title so people in the back can see. They say that we have a duty for anticipatory action when we know harm is coming, for the community to have a right to know, for instance, what are the chemicals that they're using in fracking. This is beforehand. That there has to be an alternatives assessment. What else could we do instead of this? That there has to be full cost accounting, which is what Nancy was saying. How to send out the cost of our fracking all the way to how much it will cost in Wisconsin with the sand mines. Full cost accounting. And the last one is public participation and transparency. So I like that Lyndhurst, New Jersey ordinance for letting us in Santa Cruz and letting any locality see these are the 5 good components of a precautionary principle that would be enacted. Okay. And the next page that we have is Carolyn's work, or the heart of this is a roadmap for doing this. So on JS 12, it's called Legal Guardians for Future Generations, a roadmap.
What is that?
It's in the same booklet, the same bunch that you have, Carol. We're just continuing on the pages. She has it in her right hand. So on this roadmap, Carolyn Raffensberg, who is an environmental attorney herself, met with Harvard Law School in their environmental rights department and worked for 2.5 years to hammer this out. So this is legalese about how you establish an office of the guardian. How do you actually going to do this idea of making guardianship happen? So the first section says, Ben Franklin would like the idea of the idea of a guardianship because he developed new institutions himself, right? And she talked about that if you heard her before. He saw the need for a post office and he invented it. And he saw the need for public libraries and he invented it. And we can do that. We can say, well, here, we can see a new need. We need this office of the guardianship. So they went to work together and they made model statutes, actual statutes that you can put the name of your locale in and hand it to your board of supervisors or whatever your county level is and say, here, this is how we can enact this here. So we don't have to start from the ground up again, right? These are actual templates that we can use for starting an office of guardianship in our particular areas. There's a few ideas in here. There's the problems. On page JS 13, it said what would it, establishing a future generations guardian would do 3 things. An audit of the commons, assess the impact of governmental decisions, and identify and propose alternatives. Pretty common sense. How you say that in lawyers' language is not so common sense, and that's what they've done for us. So I can go to my board of supervisors, and we're going to this fall, and say, we want these 3 things done. Get public backing behind us, come to them and say, look, this is so logical. We have a fairly friendly board of supervisors, but they don't have to be very friendly to realize that their standing goes up if they protect the environment. They can get more voters by saying, we cleaned up the place and we're going to protect it from future harm. So it's not very partisan in this. It can be handed to anybody's local government in using these models. So the next few pages are why they're important. On page JS 16 are her and Harvard Law School's outline of these offices of guardianship. And on JS 18 is the actual thing in statutory
We
form.
don't have those pages.
JS 18, keep going.
We don't have 16, 15, 17.
We have 13 and 14. We just have 2 pages.
Okay,
Oh dear.
let's see. Here, you have it right here. Just 18. And you don't have it. That's it.
Oh, it's in another.
It's in the same, it's in that same packet. So, I'm sorry, I wasn't the one who labeled these numbers, and I'm not crazy about the numbering, but at least you can see that it's in there. So, there's the proposed structure, there's the definitions, there are the duties, there are the ways that they can advocate. On the next page, the duties of all parties, and the guardian's role in litigation.
So this is what we ordered.
Yeah.
So what she did is say, basically, here are all the preliminary ideas, which we intend to give to our board of supervisors. And I think you have to, you're not gonna stand there and give them a day and a half workshop. You want to give them the background, and especially their staff the background, and go in and talk to the staff and say, here are the founding ideas, here are all the other people that are behind this, here are the ways that other countries have implemented it, here's what we can do here.
This is something else.
And then hand them that kind of statute and say, let's do that here. They can do an office of the guardian as a person, elected or appointed, or what we're gonna go for is a commission. In Santa Cruz, we have a women's commission. And policies of the Board of Supervisors are screened through the Women's Commission to see what the effect on women and girls will be. We also have a Civil Rights Commission. So policies of the Board of Supervisors are screened to see if it's racially discriminatory. This would be another one of those. This would be a commission to say, we will review every single one of your policies to see how it's going to affect us, our future generations, and our environment. So it makes logical sense to me. I just went to that participatory budgeting workshop to try to work out a way that we can actually help them fund it, which means you gotta get a bunch of people behind you and say, this is what we want the money to be used for. If we have discretionary money, we want this guardianship office established. And most importantly, I think, they don't have to do it themselves. Here, Harvard Law School worked this out. Here's what you can use for a statute. They'll have their environmental attorneys review it. We're gonna have our attorneys review it again before we give it to them. But it's so much better to have something to give to someone than to say, protect our environment, we need you to do that. This is the idea, is already pretty well established. It seems a good idea to me. Okay, what else I have in there is how Berkeley did this. Berkeley established a precautionary principle first, and here is their actual ordinance. They did use the Lyndhurst model, anticipatory action, the right to know alternatives. Pretty easy thing to give to some governing body and say, they did it, we can do this. We can establish this precautionary principle. And listed in the stuff that I've just been glossing over are other examples of places that have actually formed their own ordinances. So again, it's a way to give something to your local government that you don't have to invent. You have to adapt it to yours, that's all.
When did Berkeley do this?
Berkeley did this in 2006. In 2006. Okay. Two other papers in there, and then we're going to start talking about this. Two other papers in there are an article by Nick Buxton, who's been working on this, Could Granting Rights to Nature Change the Climate Debate? So we're not only talking about parts per million of carbon, but we're talking about that river has a right not to be polluted. It's a funny way of thinking of it. You know, but I don't think it's anthropomorphizing the river. I think it's saying that nature has rights too. And you know, Bolivia and Ecuador have already written that into their constitutions. Why can't we do that? All right, well, our constitution is up for grabs at the moment. Let's do it on a local level then. Let's do it locally. I think we're going to get things done. And in California, the county is the local level that we can actually get some of these things done. So it's a little background on how other people have done it. Then,
Well, this is important because it's not just the precautionary principle, but it's the rights of nature. And the reason he's saying that if we recognize the rights of nature, we would have a different climate movement, which is that because of the impact of climate change on nature, if we really took that into account, we would be doing much more on climate change right now. We would have a national policy on renewables. We'd have a national policy and funding for conservation and retrofit. And we would stop subsidizing big oil and natural gas. And we would not be overlooking all the environmental impacts and brushing it over for profit. We wouldn't be talking about we would not be justifying an energy policy in terms of national security and energy independence, and not acknowledging that most of this energy that we're producing is going to be exported. So the point about this article is that if we really took the rights of nature seriously, we would have a much different energy policy that would be really transforming our energy system quickly so that we avert the damage that climate change is doing to the environment and to species and to ourselves. So it's written with Cormac Cullinan, who was one of the first people to really lay out in a book called Wild Law the principles, the fundamental principles of earth rights and rights of nature. And he was inspired by, he was an environmental lawyer who saw that regulation wasn't really helping at all. And he was inspired by indigenous wisdom and indigenous beliefs and spiritual writings, and then decided that really, and he was also inspired by a 1972 article by a man named, can't think of his first name right now, Stone, who in 1972 wrote the first article about the rights of nature titled, "Do Trees Have Standing?" It's taken us since 1972 to get to this point where we're even talking about this in a forum as if this is a real possibility and as if it's really something we have to do immediately. We're in an emergency, a climate and economic emergency. So in fact, this is really, that article is really important to read
Do
and,
we have it here
Yeah.
somewhere?
yeah, and take forward.
So, the thing that we didn't talk about, now we don't have time to talk about, is how do you get that passed over corporate rights? Here's what Santa Monica did. So on that last section of that, on the last few pages of that section, it's called JS 22. Santa Monica, and this just happened this year in the spring. Santa Monica is a big city in Southern California. Big tourist town on the water. Santa Monica asserts community rights over corporate rights. They passed a Sustainability Rights Act. So this is how they did it. It's not their act. You can go look it up on the internet and find the actual act that they passed. But this is what they did, and this is an article about it from a local paper. What exactly does the ordinance aim to protect? The ordinance asserts the fundamental rights of all Santa Monica residents to clean water from sustainable sources, clean air, a sustainable food system, a sustainable natural climate, comprehensive waste disposal systems that do not degrade the environment, and a sustainable energy future based on renewable energy sources. The ordinance also recognizes that corporate entities and their directors and managers do not possess special privileges or power under the law that subordinate the community's rights to private interests. A very strong statute. So, again, I feel in Santa Cruz, like, okay, they did that, we can do that, here's a template for it. Don't have to invent the whole thing again. Santa Monica has something that we can use. The last thing that I put in there.
Could I just add to that?
Absolutely.
I think what's important about this document, which when discussed and presented to your local governing body, would be to really lift up the values that are embedded in this document. And the values embedded in this are human rights, civil rights, labor rights, and earth rights. So I think as we discuss these approaches that we can bring into that are new mechanisms for local governance, we have to really keep using the language of rights so that we advance that argument, that we really advance that framing. It gives a uniformity to what's being done individually at the local level, but it brings uniformity to the messaging and to the framing that I think is really important.
And also, when we're talking about that with our groups that we're helping, that we're working with in town, it gives everybody that language to spread around. We've had this whole conference on rights, right? But they haven't, yeah.
Do they have any concern at all about how corporate personhood will impact on this?
I don't think in this, no.
It's because we're doing this at a local level that I think that's not, it's not gonna be an issue at a local level. It will be an issue if it advances to the state level. We try to get corporate personhood, outlawed in Santa Cruz, and we have local businesses say, "What, are you crazy? I need that," and then we show them why they didn't need that. They're already protected under many other laws and all that whole thing, right? But this is, I think, something that a local, and we work a lot with Think Local First. I think this is something that will enhance local businesses. And that's what you have to, like, when you present to a board, a governing board, like our Board of Supervisors, you have to say what's in it for them. What's in it for them is that they have a review, like a unified review of their policies in respect to the environment, right? That it helps them, it will make it easier for them, rather than fighting each thing coming down the road, to have a policy already established. you wanna say to local businesses the same thing. We're gonna have a clean environment here, we'll have the rights that already established, that we already, all of us together understand. And that, it builds up the community together. It's certainly nothing that's going to be threatening each particular place. That's a different story than what's threatened to, Citibank on a national level. And that's another good reason for starting it locally. Starting it locally means that your community can see what the actual benefits are to them of this ordinance. So, the last thing I did, and then,
Can I just answer really quickly?
Yeah.
I think that working with the move to amend kind of resolution language that's addressing
Right.
constitutional rights and corporate personhood would be an exceedingly good parallel
yeah,
Right.
activity in the community at the same time. It might be too much to load, add that kind of language to this sustainability ordinance.
Oh, yeah.
I haven't looked at this in enough detail to see if one could add that kind of language to this, but it might be
well,
better.
Santa Monica did.
Santa Monica did?
Yeah, the language in Santa Monica is that corporations are limited, so the last thing is, let me see. The ordinance also recognizes that corporate entities and their directors and managers do
Right,
not
right.
possess special privileges or powers that subordinate the community's rights to their private interests. So they didn't go head on
Right.
on personhood, they just said,
Right.
we're gonna decide this, and say in Santa Cruz, there's a chemical making company that wants to make that spray, which there isn't, but say there were, then this, if we took the Santa Monica template, then that company would have to stop making the spray and just spraying us.
Or they could take it to court.
Or they could take it to court. Probably all this stuff is going to court. But, Madison did too, we're both nuclear-free zones. Well, that's probably because we don't make any nuclear weapons here, but right outside of Santa Cruz, right abutting Santa Cruz is San Mateo County, and there's a huge Lockheed factory there.
But
We're always banging at their doors and protesting and stuff, we're never allowed in, we can never figure out exactly what they're doing there. And they're in San Mateo, they're not in our nuclear-free zone. If they were over the border an inch or two, maybe we could do something about it. I'm not pretending. Santa Cruz and Madison and many other places in the country are in a good position to have an awakened population and not a lot of manufacturing that we want to cut. But, we're all dealing with this fracking stuff, it's right on your border, right on our door. It has to be happening right now. And energy, we're trying to do a local energy solutions. Okay, let me go back to this a minute. So you don't have to read this because the Santa Cruz history is the same as all the histories of all the things that you've ever done here or wherever it is that you're living. But I did try in the next couple of pages to just make generalized statements about protecting the rights of nature while dealing with climate change and setting specific goals for your legislature. So I did try to extrapolate a little bit to the more general ideas of what a group will have to use. We can help you do the training for people if you want to, or we can easily give you all the information. You can train the people yourself in this if you're interested in it. More than that is the idea that all this has to go together. So wherever it is in your community, whatever it is that you're fighting on, whatever it is that your entry is, to relate everything all as one. And to say other places have introduced these ordinances, have taken that power for themselves, and we're going to also. So I hope when you have a chance to look at this material, and I know I'm bringing back that much material from this whole conference. And I'm with Carol, I write down notes and I type up everything so that I get it through my head a little bit. And then what I usually do is go and highlight it or star the parts that I'm going to actually use in my community. So if this stuff is useful for you, it's because other places have done it, and you might be able to get in on whatever topic it is that you're fighting.
Is it on the web?
Yes.
Because the ones I've scrolled up, I'd like to have fresh copies.
Where can we find it?
Okay, I wish I could say with 100% certainty that the Earth Democracy section of the WILF website has this stuff. Do you think it does, Nancy?
It doesn't yet, it will next week.
We have some.
You sure?
No, we're not sure. So the easier way would be to write to me, and I'll send it to you.
And how do we do that?
No, you write to me in my email. So, but SCHN has all the original documents that we've, drawn from.
It'll get up very shortly.
Okay, or, as I said, don't share my email around, but use it if you want to.
So I'd
So,
like to just come back to one theme that
and some people have
underscores
some
all of
questions.
this,
Good.
which is that we're looking to lift up not only these new frames, but to highlight that these new frames are based on setting forth new values and really trying to shift our sort of value system so that we can honor our relationships with each other and with the earth in a new way, which will lead us toward, as we are at this conference, working toward a new social, political, economic system. And because I see Leah Bolger here, and because we're headed toward the August 28th, I believe, 50th anniversary of the Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, I would just like to remind you that the speech of his that gets overlooked over and over again is his very famous speech, Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence.
Right.
And I would like you,
Yeah.
I have some copies of a short article I wrote about that speech, but I would like you to just Google that speech, Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence, and read that speech. Print it out, and as this Martin Luther King I Have a Dream celebration is taking place, remind your friends and pass that speech out at local events that in fact, what he was doing in that speech, which he gave a year before at Riverside Church when he was then a year later assassinated.
1 year to the day.
1 year to the day.
I think that's what got him.
April 4th, 1968. He gave this speech April 4th, 1967 at Riverside Church. It's often referred to as the Riverside Church speech, but it must be referred to as Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence. And what he was breaking silence about was that he was moving from civil rights to a critique of capitalism.
Right.
And what he was saying was that he questioned the U.S. policy of interventions in foreign countries to defeat not only communist tyranny, but any opposition to the corporate capitalist system of imperialism and oppression that protects corporate interests and the wealth and power of the ruling classes. And this is what he said, or wrote. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. He called for a revolution of values, a shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. He envisioned a worldwide fellowship that lifts up neighborly concern beyond one's tribe, race, class, and nation. He cautioned that a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. And I think it is really important to not let the corporate class to lift up constantly the I Have a Dream speech as if we've solved any of the problems that the dream was really envisioning. And to avoid the fact that he gave this really important speech that's about values and it's about shifting the economic, political, social system to a new level of compassion, caring, solidarity. And that's what this conference has been all about. That's what our Earth Democracy track has been trying to highlight. And this, I think I have enough copies of this small piece that I wrote about it, but I had the privilege of being at Riverside Church a couple of years ago where they gave a small forum, and the man who wrote the speech for Martin Luther King and has written a very small biography about writing the speech and knowing Martin Luther King as a comrade in arms through the civil rights movement was there. And it's really quite moving. So I just urge you to read that speech and lift it up to your friends and family on this anniversary. And don't let the powers that be get away with just saying we've got a dream. We have to change the values and work in solidarity, and he spells it out. And he spelled it out in 1967.
And I think they killed him for that.
Yeah,
Right.
As soon as he connected it with the, economy and lack of democracy and they got. Did anybody want to ask any questions or anything? I'm sorry I had to go through this so fast, so let's go through the back. So back, then middle, and then, yeah.
Thank you, Randa and Nancy, for this fabulous presentation. I wrote down a few things that probably are addressed in the packet, but maybe you can react to them and maybe you can say, don't know, or never mind. But to me, there's this uber individualism ethic in our country, that land ownership and the codification of that has, it impacts things from spraying pesticide on your own lawn to the stand your ground, or the castle doctrine. And I'm wondering how you address that with these principles. And I think it's a really important thing to think about, because those things have been codified. And if you tell somebody, no, you can't spray your lawn across the street from you because of these principles, you're gonna get.
I don't think you can. I think that's why this is concentrated on the commons.
Yeah.
I mean, we can talk all we want at this conference about capitalism and private property,
Yeah.
but if we wait to deal with that before
Yeah.
we deal with the actual
Okay.
climate change, I don't think it's gonna, this is just me.
And,
you
yeah.
know.
And then in the Lindenhurst, New Jersey, it's been codified, but I'm assuming state law takes precedence, so how do you?
Well, Berkeley adopted those, so I think it transferred to California, and wherever you are, you'd have to check.
Okay.
I mean, what we did is we wrote a tiny little grant for, $80 for 3 meeting rooms, right? And then $200 or $350 to pay an environmental lawyer to look at our stuff before we hand it to the board, and I think that's what you have to do.
And then lastly, what form did your public backing take when you went before your bodies? Did you have individuals sign petitions? Did you have groups sign on? All of the above?
All of the above, and that's the list that I did on that page that said what we did in Santa Cruz.
Okay.
It's basically just listing how we're trying to make more coalitions than ever.
Okay.
Because this is nothing you have to sell, it's not a hard sell.
Yeah.
No matter whether people are working, it doesn't matter what issues people are working on. They want to have air and water, right? So what they're saying is, yeah, they'll help us with this guardianship. And that's what we did. We tried to get a bunch of different kind of groups together. I'll tell you another thing that we're doing on October 3rd. WILF has arranged a round table, meaning that just people sitting around in a circle, of all the different groups in our community that we could think of. We asked them to send 2 representatives each to just address the question of how are we going to get their constituents active on climate change. Not to talk about their solutions, talk about how do you get your people moving. So we have high school students, we have Latino young families, we have the labor people coming. We try to make every group, we have like the Filipinos and Japanese in our community have been there for now 100 years farming, but they still have decent community organization. People from their communities, everybody that we could think of, to say, if you're not out in the street right now protesting, what can we do to make it happen? Already some kids have told us, some young people, they're not kids, but some young people have told us, well, we don't want to go to another panel discussion and listen to all you talking in front of us.
Yeah.
Right? We have to have like music and art and fun and do some kind of events together and, actually maybe some performance artists and, make it something enjoyable, which truthfully, the anti-Vietnam War movement was. We got cracked on the head and blood and arrested and all that, but also it was totally fun.
Yeah.
So we'll leave out the drugs and sex, put that over there, and talk to this group of people about what will it take to get you folks out. Because there's just no more time to wait. We have 5 years, between 5 and 15 years to just turn the whole thing around. In my opinion, it's just me. I don't need to convince young Latino families that are struggling that they should deal with capitalism, and how to overthrow it. But they want water for their kids. So we're all in it together, and everyone knows that. It's just that most people don't have the energy or the understanding of where do they start. And we're going to do just sitting around together and trying to say to each other, what should we do now? Do you want to? No, someone else. Okay, yeah. I'm going to pass this around if you'll stick your things up.
You mentioned inventing the wheel, and there are some things in place that are oversight or regulatory, and the question is, if you feel that they've let the corporate interests buy them or influence them, beyond what their original function was supposed, you have to expose that. And just